Fans worshipped Miles Davis like a god. His humble reaction made them love him even more. It was 1981, and Miles had just returned to performing after 5 years of silence. The audience at Avery Fisher Hall was treating him like a deity, calling out, "We love you, Miles," and giving him standing ovations before he even played a note. But instead of accepting their worship with the arrogance everyone expected, Miles did something that shocked the entire jazz world. He walked to the microphone and said, "Thank you, but I'm just a man who plays trumpet. The real gods are the people who come out to hear music." That moment of genuine humility transformed him from a mysterious legend into a beloved human being, proving that sometimes the greatest power comes not from accepting worship, but from graciously deflecting it. It was June 27, 1981, and Lincoln Center's Avery Fisher Hall was buzzing with anticipation, unlike anything the venue had ever experienced. Miles Davis was returning to the stage after 5 years of complete silence from the music world. 5 years during which he had become more myth than man, more legend than living artist. The absence had transformed him from a great musician into something approaching a religious figure in the minds of jazz fans worldwide. The tickets had sold out in 17 minutes. Scalpers were getting 10 times face value. People had flown in from Japan, Europe, and South America just to witness what many were calling the most important jazz concert in decades. This wasn't just a comeback. This was the resurrection of the Prince of Darkness himself. But the Miles Davis, who walked onto that stage, was not the man who had walked off 5 years earlier. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were about to meet an entirely different person than the one they had elevated to mythical status. The transformation had begun during those 5 years of silence, when Miles had retreated to his Upper West Side townhouse and confronted the demons that had been driving him for decades. The cocaine addiction, the volatile relationships, the need to maintain an image of cool detachment that had isolated him from genuine human connection. The hip surgery that had started his retirement had given him something he had never had before: time to think, time to heal, and time to discover who he really was when he wasn't performing the role of Miles Davis, jazz legend. He had spent those years painting, studying music theory, listening to young musicians, and slowly rebuilding his relationship with his own humanity. The man who emerged from that period of reflection was still brilliant, still uncompromising about music, but he was no longer the deliberately difficult persona that had defined his public image for so long. As Miles walked onto the Avery Fisher Hall stage that evening, wearing a simple black suit and carrying his gold-plated trumpet, the audience erupted into applause that lasted for nearly 4 minutes. People were on their feet before he had taken 3 steps. Some were crying. Others were calling out expressions of love and devotion that bordered on worship. "Miles, we love you. You're the greatest musician who ever lived. We missed you so much. Thank you for coming back." The adoration was overwhelming, almost frightening in its intensity. This wasn't the typical appreciation that great artists receive from their audiences. This was something deeper, more personal, more spiritual. These people had elevated Miles to a level that transcended music and entered the realm of the sacred. Miles stood at the microphone, looking out at the sea of worshipful faces, and for a moment he was genuinely moved by the depth of their devotion. The old Miles might have accepted this worship as his due, might have basked in the godlike status that his absence had created, but the new Miles, the man who had spent 5 years learning to be human again, felt something different. He felt humbled. "Thank you," he said, into the microphone, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp that every jazz fan in the world could recognize. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for waiting." The applause started again, but Miles raised his hand gently to quiet the crowd. "I want to say something before we play. I know some of you think I'm something special. I know there are people who talk about me like I'm some kind of god or something." The audience was hanging on every word. This was more than Miles had said to an audience in decades. "But I want you to know something. I'm just a man who plays trumpet. I'm not a god. I'm not a saint. I'm not even particularly wise. I'm just someone who loves music, and has been lucky enough to make a living playing it. The hall was completely silent now. This was not what anyone had expected from the Prince of Darkness. The real gods are the people who come out to hear music. You're the ones who keep this art form alive. You're the ones who make it matter. Without you, I'm just a guy in his house playing trumpet for the walls. He paused, looking around the audience with genuine affection. So thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this music, and thank you for letting me share it with you. The applause that followed was different from the worship that had greeted his entrance. It was warmer, more personal, more connected. In deflecting their worship, Miles had created something more valuable: genuine love. The concert that followed was extraordinary, not just for the music, which was inspired and innovative, but for the connection between artist and audience. Miles smiled during his solos, something that had been virtually unheard of in his previous performances. He made eye contact with people in the front rows. He even spoke to the audience between songs, thanking them for specific pieces of appreciation. During intermission, instead of retreating to his dressing room as he had always done in the past, Miles did something unprecedented. He walked into the lobby of Lincoln Center and spent 20 minutes talking to fans, not signing autographs in the typical celebrity fashion, but actually talking to people, asking them about their lives, thanking them personally for coming, treating each interaction as if it mattered to him personally. "I've been listening to your music since I was 15, a young woman told him, her voice shaking with emotion. "Your albums got me through college, through my divorce, through everything." The old Miles might have nodded politely and moved on. The new Miles stopped, looked her in the eyes and said, "That means more to me than you know. Music is supposed to help people through things. I'm glad it was there for you when you needed it." To a teenage musician who nervously asked for advice, Miles said, "Just keep playing. Don't worry about being like me or anyone else. Find your own voice. That's the only voice worth having." To an elderly man who thanked him for creating the soundtrack to my youth, Miles replied, "We created it together. You were listening, which means you were part of making it happen." Word of Miles's transformation spread quickly through the jazz community. Musicians who had known him for decades were astonished by the change. Critics who had written about his aloofness and difficult reputation had to completely revise their understanding of who he was. But the real testament to his transformation came from his fans. The worship that had initially greeted his return evolved into something deeper and more genuine. People didn't just admire his music anymore. They loved him as a human being. At subsequent concerts, audiences would arrive early just to see if Miles might come out and talk to them. He often did, treating these interactions not as obligations, but as opportunities to connect with the people who made his music meaningful. The press began calling him the Prince of Grace, a title that reflected not just his musical elegance, but his newfound ability to interact with people with genuine warmth and humility. Musicians who worked with him during this period were amazed by the change in his leadership style. Instead of the intimidating, demanding band leader of his earlier years, he had become a supportive collaborator who encouraged his musicians to find their own voices within his musical vision. "The old Miles would tell you what to play," said one sideman who worked with him during this period. "The new Miles would help you discover what you wanted to play." The transformation was so complete that some longtime fans initially wondered if Miles had lost his edge, if the humility had somehow diminished his artistic intensity. They needn't have worried. If anything, his music became more powerful because it was now connected to a genuine emotional honesty that had been missing from his earlier work. The albums he recorded during this period, The Man with the Horn, Star People, Decoy, showed an artist who was still pushing boundaries and challenging conventions, but who was doing so from a place of joy and connection rather than anger and isolation. More importantly, his humility had created a new model for how legendary artists could relate to their audiences and their legacy. He showed that acknowledging your humanity didn't diminish your artistry, it enhanced it. Young musicians who met Miles during this period often spoke about how his humility had inspired them not just musically, but personally. He had demonstrated that true greatness didn't require arrogance or emotional distance. In fact, the opposite was true. The greatest artists were often the most generous and humble about their gifts. The story of Miles's transformation became legendary in its own right, not because of what he played, but because of how he chose to be. He had shown that a living legend could acknowledge his humanity without diminishing his mythical status. In fact, his humility had made him more legendary, not less. Critics and fans, who had spent decades analyzing his music, now found themselves equally fascinated by his character development. He had proved that personal growth and artistic evolution could continue at any stage of life, and that the most profound changes often came from learning to connect with others rather than maintaining distance from them. The man who had once been famous for turning his back on audiences and playing with studied indifference had become someone who faced his audiences directly, playing with obvious joy and gratitude. The transformation was so complete that it seemed almost impossible that this was the same person. But it was the same person, just a person who had learned that true power came not from being worshipped as a god, but from graciously acknowledging your shared humanity with the people who appreciated your work. Years later, when jazz historians wrote about this period of Miles's career, they often focused on his musical innovations and his influence on younger musicians. But the people who were there, who witnessed his transformation firsthand, remembered something different. They remembered the moment when a living legend chose humility over worship, connection over mystique, and genuine love over distant adoration. They remembered the night when Miles Davis proved that the greatest artists are not gods, they're humans who have learned to share their gifts with grace and gratitude. If this story of personal transformation, humility, and the power of genuine human connection moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that true greatness comes not from accepting worship, but from graciously deflecting it while still sharing your gifts. Have you ever witnessed someone handle success and admiration with genuine humility? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to check out more stories about the moments when legends revealed their humanity.